thank you for coming. This is a full house, and there are a couple of seats up here in the nook here, and we've got a few wooden chairs which we can pull out, and I might do that in a moment. I'm Matthew Swift, the director of Trident Gallery, and I am so pleased to welcome you to a conversation with Susan Erony. This exhibition, Towers and Other Thoughts, opened 1 week ago. This is with a reception. We have the artist here to speak to us today about her process, some of the ideas and history, personal and global, that have gone into this work. And we have a third event. We are working, myself, my wife Sarah Slifer Swift, the director of the Live Art series here, we're working with Susan to put together Towers and Other Thoughts in Performance, which is 2 weeks from yesterday, Saturday evening at 7 p.m. And I think Susan has some prepared remarks, and then I think we'll have time for, we'll see when we are, time for some question and answer with us all, and then we can break for some more informal conversation after that, and those who need to go will go. Without further comment, I will introduce Susan Erony to you.
Thank you. Well, now I feel even more nervous. Wow, thank you all for coming. Really, I'm kind of overwhelmed. I also, of course, want to give some specific thanks to Emily at the back of the gallery, who works tirelessly for the cause and who has been just wonderfully patient and kind. To my husband, Jay, who's over there, and who's really my art partner. I'm about to out you. He was a great teacher and still is for me of art. And when he made art, my favorite artist, and I feel really fortunate to be able to bug him to look at my work sometimes every 60 seconds. I also have Matt. Thank you so much. Matt's support and lack of commercial pressure on me are things that I absolutely cherish, and I'm really endlessly grateful for. It probably won't surprise you that my work is not an easy sell. And until I saw the process Matt went through to conceptualize and establish this gallery, and still continues to go through in sorting his goals and priorities, I just couldn't go with a commercial gallery. Every time I considered it, I just got totally depressed and wanted to stop making art. So I had to figure out another way to move forward as an artist in terms of getting my work out, and I did. But when I met Matt, I got the feeling that I might be able to handle it at this point in my life, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan.
I really will ask you and hope you will continue to be the audience for this gallery. Since much of my work in this show uses Kafka text as inspiration and as actual parts of the work, and each piece that does is titled after the Kafka piece I used, I thought I would start by quoting him to you. So this piece is from a group of aphorisms, sort of aphorisms, that he wrote on paradise. And it reads, oh, and I should say that it's one of the pieces, short pieces I used in one of the small pieces over there. We were expelled from paradise, but paradise was not destroyed. In a sense, our expulsion from paradise was a stroke of luck. For had we not been expelled, paradise would have had to be destroyed. And when I was working with that, and then when I was thinking about how to start this talk, I thought, that's really what this show is about. I think that the biblical idea of the fall of man, in fact, has been what my work's been about since about 1989, when I started to take on the subject of genocide. Before that, I was working on a series on the Industrial Revolution in America and painting things like a couple of steam engines, steel plants, a bridge truss, an M60 tank, the Empire State Building, and I just love that stuff. I love the way it looks. I don't think there's anything more beautiful than a mid or earlier 20th century steel plant. It was really great to paint. And the pieces were a way, I thought, if I paint these things big enough and put them in front of people, maybe I can get them to think that the Industrial Revolution is coming to sort of end and we're transitioning into a technological age. This was in the 80s. And maybe it would be a good idea to actually think about the good things and the bad things that came out of the Industrial Revolution before we take on another one without thinking about unintended consequences, as they're called. So the industrial age and modernism were, of course, concomitant and linked. And the modernists loved industrialization. And I'm primarily talking about artists now, but it was also true in other fields. And they associated industrial development with progress and with progress as good. Then World War I came, and the industrialization of war in that war was rather disillusioning to a lot of people, but not quite disillusioning enough. And it was World War II and the further developments in industrial war machines, but especially the industrialization of genocide that really tore a hole in the social construct and that brought in a greater disillusionment with society as it had developed since that revolution. I decided to include a couple of pieces from that period, and I'll explain why in a minute. So the earliest work in this show is from 1990, and the earliest work is also in the back room, in the vault. There are two pieces based on an image that's never left my head. It's of train tracks going through the main gate of a concentration camp called Birkenau and going directly to the door of the gas chamber. This was in southern Poland, and Birkenau was the partner camp to Auschwitz. So it was symbolic of the amazing efficiency of that genocide. And I don't think there's been another industrial genocide historically or since. But it was also the form of the train tracks, not just the symbolism, that compelled me. And so there are a couple of other pieces in this show that are from that period that I did in the 90s, but that I finished in 2015. One is over here, and this is called On Parables, which does use Kafka. And the other is over here, and it's called Understanding Genocide. And when I had looked at the underlying paintings of those two pieces, I realized they were kind of tower mound shapes, and there it was again. I said, and I'm sorry, the other early work in the show are three pieces in the back room of Chilean disappeared. They're portraits, and though those aren't They're from '93. Though those aren't they aren't aesthetically quite as linked to this show, though they do have drawing in them. They are conceptually linked. And so I decided to include those as well, and those I finished in 2015, though I had started them in the 90s. So I mentioned, I don't know if you've read my artist statement, but if you did, I mention in it that the overt use of the tower shape and of Kafka entered my work also in 1993 when a friend of mine named Harvey Bloom, who wrote about art, contacted a few friends of his and decided he was going to produce an art project. And so he sent us all Kafka parables and said, make a piece of art. And I was the only one who would do it because I loved Kafka. And the parable I got was called The Building of the Temple. So it's about a temple that almost builds itself, and it does so perfectly. It's beautiful. But if you look at it closely, it's covered with barbaric scrawls, and becomes, the closer you look, the more unsettling it becomes. So it was, to me, about the desecration of the sacred. And I thought, that's something I see too often. He had been already one of my heroes for a long time, but I'd never really thought about using a writer's work in my art. I mean, one whose permission I didn't have, because it kind of felt like stealing. All I can think is that Harvey probably said some stuff to me that made me feel okay about it. So I went ahead, I did the piece, and I really enjoyed it. I love words. I love letters. I love the way they all look and work. I love the way they come together and make thoughts and communicate. And I just think they're beautiful. So I decided that, as I thought about with the industrial work, we're entering this age, we're farther along than we were, and this technological age, and the role of the book and reading is changing. So one thing I could do is a lot of writing by hand. And I really think it will be a loss if we lose the ability to do so and we lose books. It just shows I'm old that I think that, but I do. So I'm trying to counter it in my way. I also began to think about writing more as drawing, as drawing. And so in thinking about it that way, when I started the work for this show, I wanted to develop a font that would feel very natural to me, that I was pleased with aesthetically. And I knew I was going to use it over and over and over again. So it took me about 5 years to come up, this was actually before this show, to come up with the font that I wanted to use. And that's the font you'll see in the handwriting in this show. 1993, after Harvey had sent me that job to do, I decided to do another parable. And that's this piece, the large yellowish one, called But Take Another Abraham. I also love doing that piece. I really like to paint big, something I haven't done in a while. I like painting letters rather than drawing them because I feel more control over paint than writing materials or pencils. But it took me a long time to understand the text I was using, and until I understood it, I couldn't really do the piece because I was afraid what I wanted to say wouldn't come out. So it's about a world where we posit, or Kafka posits, a different Abraham than the one in Genesis, in the Bible, who's asked to sacrifice his son. And Kafka's posited Abraham as a very foolish old man who has a really dirty child. Abraham suffers, Kafka's Abraham suffers, but he doesn't suffer because of this horrible edict given to him by God. He suffers because he's afraid he would be laughed at or scorned, and the same for his child. And so the piece came to mean to me something about embarrassment and the shame we feel when we say the wrong things or do stupid things. It's about how ridiculous we can all feel. I still see it as a tough excerpt, and as tough to ingest as the biblical one. And I started to see that happening more and more when I read on with Kafka's parables that are kind of taken from the Bible. It was that piece that made me realize that this shape I kept coming up with was taking me over, and was coming out in various forms, like the Tower of Babel eventually, funeral pyres, burial mounds, piles of confiscated possessions. I saw at concentration camps, and the haystacks in which my father's brothers were murdered in Ukrainian pogroms. And probably that's where it all started, because I grew up hearing about those haystacks all the time. And they stuck in my head. So when I came actually to think about doing this show a couple of years ago and what I would do, I thought, why don't I go with this form and really delve into it? And maybe I'll figure it out enough so that I can move past it, understand it, and move on to something else. Well, I can't say that happened, but I've kind of made peace with my obsession with it. And in the past year, it was the specific of the Tower of Babel that really became the center of my thinking about this show. The Tower of Babel is a post-flood story in Genesis where, because of the flood and so many people dying, the people who were left were unified, and they lived near each other and they spoke the same language. And it was they who decided to come together and build this Tower of Babel to be on the same level as God. Of course, they were punished for this arrogance or hubris and scattered all over the world, and so they lost even the ability to understand each other and collaborate. So I thought, boy, is that a good symbol for certainly the last year and a half of this election campaign where, we're talking over each other and across each other and not listening and not communicating. Anyway, I started to draw towers, and some of them ended up being mounds. I received a wonderful gift from a retiring artist of some beautiful drawing paper and beautiful drawing materials, and quite a bit of them. And I hadn't drawn in a long time until I started to re-know Gabriel Barzaghi, thanks to Trident. And we drew together a few times, which was very kind and patient of her. So even though I was intimidated by her incredible skill, I knew that I could at least draw a tower, and I remembered how much I liked to draw. So the first one I did is behind you on that, in the corner wall sort of, and it's just called Blue Mound. And I decided in that one to get myself started and to maybe even try to use some color, an unusual thing for me. And I really have no idea how I came up with pink and blue, which are not likely colors for me, but there it is. And so I did my first one. At about the same time, I was asked to do some work for three shows in Europe. And they were all going to have the same work they were all going to have work in them. And with this show, I didn't really have time to come up with original work that was different for all three shows. So I thought, okay, I'll draw another tower, which I can use in this show, and then manipulate it digitally and print out copies of it, unfinished, but with the digital manipulation done, and then draw into it. So I still had my hand in the work, which I have a need to do. And that work is on this wall. It's 3 of the 4 pieces you see that have a similar base. So the tower behind me is actually the base, without the writing, is the basis of those pieces. And the 4th one I added for this show, that's in the lower right. But the first one on the upper right is called 1st September 1939. And these pieces, as I think I just said, all had to be on race science. The exhibitions and conference were primarily sponsored by an organization that was looking at ethics in medicine after the Holocaust and the kinds of medical experiments that were done then. And were very relevant now that we have genetic engineering, these questions. So they were doing this conference in 3 cities in Europe, and they wanted to have exhibitions with them. Anyway, 1st September 1939 uses a letter of that date written by Hitler, Adolf Hitler, to authorize specific physicians in Germany to euthanize citizens who were incurably ill or undesirable. No legal justification was necessary. By the late 30s, the German medical establishment had viewed mental illness, lax morality, and criminality as signs of racial inferiority. The letter set the precedent for genocide on grounds of societal health and criminal justice. So this was really the start. And the English translation of the letter briefly is just it's written to Reichsleiter Buhle and Dr. Brandt, MD, are charged with the responsibility of enlarging the authority of certain physicians to be designated by name in such a manner that persons who, according to human judgment, are incurable can, upon a most careful diagnosis of their condition of sickness, be accorded a mercy death. That letter began what was called the T4 program and was the beginning of mass murder on racial grounds. The remains of the murdered were cremated randomly, they were thrown in a pile, randomly put in urns and sent to relatives with a false cause of death. And so my towers in those pieces kind of became burial mounds. The second piece, Tree of Races, on the upper left, uses an image that unfortunately I scanned from some book in, the late 90s for a show, and I don't remember the origin except that it was an English or an American textbook, a British or an American textbook, medical textbook, standard, and is a kind of an iconic eugenical image. Both America and England were key sites for the development of eugenical thinking and practice, especially America. We were a eugenics hotbed and the place the Germans went to for ideas and policies prior to Hitler's rule. So I chose the Tree of Races image because of its seemingly benign depiction of really harmful ideas. And then I put yellow in the piece as a toxic color. It's the color of polluted skies over steel plants, actually. Useless eaters on the lower left refers to when in 1933 there was a law in Germany put into effect called the Law for the Prevention of Progeny with Hereditary Diseases. The German government called for the sterilization of Germans with hereditary diseases and other things, physical deformities, epilepsy, blindness, deafness, alcoholism. And propaganda began terming the disabled life unworthy of life or useless eaters, and emphasizing their economic cost to society. And finally, yearning on the lower right used the same process of the other three pieces plus paper collage. So the hands at the top are cut and pasted. And basically, it's about my wish that all this horrible stuff would stop, that it'd just go away. And I often use hands to symbolize pleading or desire, or cries for help. So that's my pleading. I needed to get away from genocide at that point, and I went back to the specific Tower of Babel concept and went to Kafka's parable, the city coat of arms. In it, he writes of people gathering together. It's very closely based or a takeoff from the biblical story. So he writes of people who gather together to build a tower. And they do really well at first. They plan a city to live in, and they focus on logistics and what tools to use. And then they start arguing. Because tools will improve in the future, and gee, maybe they should wait to start, and why bother now? They'll just have to rebuild it. So they decide, well, let's focus on just building the city. But of course, the city has areas that are nicer than others. So then people start fighting about who's going to live where, and it gets worse, and violence starts. And they decide, well, we have to wait for unity to come back to build this tower, which is going to be a lot of work. But of course, unity will never come. So the city grows, generations pass, and people just forget about the tower, basically. They don't believe it's possible anymore. And, but they're settled there. It's a city, it's their home. But the parable ends with all the legends and songs that came to birth in that city are filled with longing for a prophesied day when the city would be destroyed by 5 successive blows from a gigantic fist. It is for that reason, too, that the city has a closed fist on its coat of arms. And really, I just got hysterically laughing at the end, which I didn't expect. And it gave me a lot of relief because it seems very relevant today when I just can't wait for the strife in our country, let alone the world, to end. And if it takes a giant fist coming down, and sometimes that sounds better. So the piece that I did is, it's the piece when you come in the door, opposite the door on the right, and it's got a blue sky. And my tower did get built, unlike the people in the parable, but it ended up with what looks like blood running out of its door, and it's kind of on scorched earth. So I thought but it also looks like a beehive to a lot of people, and then I started to see it that way with bees buzzing around it. So I thought, okay, maybe there's hope. that we will figure out a way to cooperate. And really, even I can't be really totally dire all the time. So, and I like bees, and they're dying, you know. So then I went to a message from the emperor, which is on that wall. And it's another parable that is actually part of a bigger story, but for this, I'll just talk about that. It's about a deathbed message sent by a dying emperor to you, just to you, and specially to you. But the problem is, as there always is in Kafka, that the message, though it's given to a messenger, can never reach you because the way is just too long. It's too far, and there are too many obstacles. It's impossible. And then Kafka ends with that even though you know that the messenger can never possibly find you and get to you, especially since he has a message from a dead man. But you sit at your window when evening falls and dream it to yourself. And I thought, you know, ain't it the truth? We all want things to happen that may be impossible and that we yearn for, like my yearning piece, you know, for utopia and harmony, and why can't we just all get along? So I did want to bring in some of that yearning into the image I used. So I used another copy of the piece on the lower left, the race science piece, actually the two pieces at the bottom with the hands. But I truncated it. So it was, because this was meant to be a small piece. I thought it should be small. And so I just put in a little of that yearning. The next piece I want to talk about is called A Report to the Academy. And this is one of the two larger paintings that's in the show. Those are at the front of the gallery, and it's the one that's more abstract. So A Report to the Academy is a favorite of mine. It's a short story. It's about an ape who ends up being the victim of a group of hunters who travel to an island to hunt. And he's shot and badly wounded and then trapped and caged and brought back to the country of the hunters on a ship in a really small cage. He miraculously survives the journey, thanks in part to the goodwill of the crew of the ship, who are kind of nice to him. And he recovers, and he realizes in the process that he can never hope for freedom, that he'll never get away. But if he wants to live, the only way to do that is to become as much as possible like his captors. So he really studies the ship's crew and tries to mimic them. And he's remarkably successful. And subsequently, he's celebrated, he's trained, he's given a very comfortable life, which he keeps earning with his public appearances and acquiescence in allowing himself to be studied. But he knows, and he tells the Academy this, what he's given up and what he can't do. He knows at night when a kind of half-trained female chimpanzee is brought to him for comfort, he cannot look at her because she has so much pain and fear in her eyes, and that brings, somehow, it brings back his own. He knows that he's forgotten in the 5 years since he was fully an ape what that felt like, and that he can't get it back because he's like a man now. And he knows he can never communicate what that transition was like from ape to man, either to himself or others, but he also feels that ape identity constantly nipping at his heels, as he puts it. And he believes that we all, all humans, must feel that. So he's, once again, a symbol of our inability to understand each other, to bridge the gap, to understand the other, even if that other is within ourselves. So in that piece, I used a lot of burnt paper from my wood stove to make a tower or a mound. And I did that because burnt paper is a symbol for me of what's lost or destroyed, but I also find it just magnificent and seductive. I really find it incredibly beautiful. The piece behind me, The Great Wall of China, is another short story, and this is the one that actually contains a message to the emperor. China's real Great Wall was begun probably as early as the 7th century BCE, and it's been combined with other sections, built later, and been rebuilt and maintained and rebuilt again, and just improved periodically. So most of what exists today dates from the Ming Dynasty, which was from 1368 to 1644. In Kafka's story, the narrator is a mason who himself worked on the wall, and he's talking about his experience and the existence of the wall. He describes it and its purpose as to be a protective barrier against northern invaders. He explains that it was built in separate pieces because the builders could only work for a certain number of years at a time, and then they would just be exhausted and would need a break, and they would be sent home. But as they were coming back, or even before they were sent home, they would start to see their section of the wall being joined to another section of the wall. So they would get in their journeys home and then back again to work this sense of the wall accumulating in size and growing, and it gave them great satisfaction to keep them going. And masons were very highly regarded members of society because they were so crucial to this work. They were the ones who built the wall and designed it. Now, of course, these northern invaders could potentially get through the gaps in the wall as long as they existed, but the wall also served another function, which was that of nation building. So, I said, aha, nation building. Boy, were we in that mess last decade. And, like the Kafka story, the attempt is to bring people together against a common enemy and then build a place that reflects, in this case it wasn't in our country, our values. And like everything in Kafka fails, that failed too, for us. It did better in Kafka's story, actually. So the one mission of the people building the wall became to serve the emperor. But even the emperor's specific identity is never clear. It's his existence that is revered. And whether the northern invaders, the enemies, actually existed or wanted to invade is also unclear. The narrator neither sees nor actually hears of them except in stories and legends that he was told in school and from folklore stories. And as a resident of the South, which he is, additionally, he lives so far from the North that the invaders, should they come, would never reach him. But the fear of them exists and will until the wall is finished. So the wall can never be finished because that fear would no longer unify the nation. And so it's like endless war. Given the talk in our country about a wall on our southern border, I just couldn't resist this story. And this was the last piece I finished, and for it, I went back to my base tower for those race science pieces and for that piece. And so this is what I went back to. And I decided, as I often do, to layer the text. I don't always, but I do a lot. And doing so, which makes me happy and gives me aesthetic pleasure, is also a way I comment on the complexity of my often difficult chosen written things I copy. I mean, they're all, really complex and hard to understand and figure out, and our difficulty in understanding others and ourselves. And it makes me think about, as I said before, people talking past each other and over each other and not listening. So the last piece I'll talk about, though there is other work in the show, is the painting, the oil painting, the one oil painting at the front called Wishing I Were Bruegel. This was really agonizing to do. I suffered. They talk about artists suffering. I was a suffering artist doing that piece. And I know that's ridiculous because, really, with everything else in the world. But the piece did sort of encapsulate my struggle with oil painting. I am still one of those people who believes in my heart that oil painting is the highest technique and the real art. And I fight myself about it because I fight with myself about everything I do that's not oil painting. And then when I do oil painting, I really don't think I'm very good at it, so I really struggle. My desire to be Rembrandt absolutely never leaves me and causes me great longing. That's what that piece should be about, yearning. But other artists come off, they come on and off my list. And in the last couple of years, it was Peter Bruegel the Elder. And it's because I was doing Towers of Babel, and I thought, oh boy, the two Towers of Babel in art I love the most are by Peter Bruegel. And they were both done in 1563, and they're amazing. They are so detailed and so beautiful. And so accurate, the building techniques and the tiny people. Anyway, he did a third, but it's lost. It was the little one on ivory. So I decided if I were going to paint a tower in sacred oil paint, I should do it after Bruegel. And like all of Kafka's main characters, I failed completely and kind of went into a pit. And I finally, climbed my way out of it and decided that all I really could do was my own version of this piece. So I sort of used the structure of Bruegel's towers. And I was just hoping it would give Bruegel a nod, that was okay enough. So that's that piece. I do kind of like some of the color. Anyway, too close. I'll go back to one of Kafka's Paradise aphorisms. He said, there are questions, this is a very short one. There are questions which we could never get over if we were not delivered from them by the operation of nature. So my closing words are that I think I'm totally stuck with those questions until my own, I hope, natural end. Thank you for listening. So glad that's done, except if you have questions, which I would love. But I got to tell you how hard this was to do during this election season. I am so obsessed and freaked out that I really don't know how I talked about anything else. So I brought it in a little, but not too much, I hope. Anyway, please, if anyone has any question or comment.
So would you like to leave now and check the news?
I did stop all day and do so, and I'll catch up when I get home. It's good for me not to. Wow, have I just overwhelmed you with blather? Yeah.
What is your approach to the performance component?
Oh, my approach is to respect Sarah's decisions and Matt's advice and, sort of talk about Kafka, I don't know, actually, how I will be useful at all. So I'm really leaving it to them and letting them tell me what I can do to be supportive and help conceptualize it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question, since we are what we did with the Industrial Revolution has resulted in such, horrible, terribly efficient processes like industrial genocide.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any insights about where we're going with our technological revolution?
Any insights about?
Any ideas about where we're going with that second span of revolution, from the industrial to the technological?
Yeah, I think we're going ahead without thinking very much.
Can you repeat the question?
I think, yeah. She said, since there were such horrible things that came out of the Industrial Revolution, like industrial genocide, do I have any insights about where we are going with the technological changes? Did I say it well? I don't know, I think I do try to keep an historical perspective. I think society takes a long time to work through new developments, and that because of politics and in our country, competing capitalist interests. And I should say I'm not a total Marxist. I'm really not. I think that we don't really have the kind of capitalism that works to the benefit of society as well as it could. And because of that, we don't make good decisions about how we move forward with new knowledge and how we use that knowledge. And so that is, of course, what scares me. And we see results of it all around us. With technology, with security, with lack of security. Drones are a very mixed blessing. Talk about depersonalizing warfare. you know, I think it's important that we are conscious of the results of our actions, and drones make that less so. You know, I think I would have more hope. I mean, yeah, I would have more hope if the stakes weren't what they are with nuclear possibilities and chemical warfare possibilities. I mean, terrorism is uncontrollable. And so when you're not dealing with states, with nations that don't, and with entities that don't necessarily have the same desire to survive in the manner we think about survival, it gets very frightening. So I don't know, that's how I see it from, you know, I mean, really an artist's point of view. But you know, clearly there are other people who see things that way, who have a lot more expertise than I do. Yeah, so I think that's the best answer I can give at this point. Otto.
I have never been struck more by the gap you have opened in this talk between what art has developed into as a commodity and the way you approach art. And it was always clear to me that you were standing for the concept of art that but I don't really want to describe it. I just want to express my gratitude and also for opening this gap. That your work is based on very deep thinking about the human condition. And I'm not sure that was always the case. I think it may be that we tend to project that into the past. If we look at books by Rembrandt, and I'm not sure about that, but you know, there is a rupture between your way of thinking about art and what we hear and see about as art. To live with that rupture, of course, is difficult. But it's also, I think, an inspiration, or can be. So basically, I'm saying, I just want to express my esteem for your self-awareness as an artist, and your struggle with some internalized others in you that you, I think, said you're not fully capable of wrestling down or understanding. I think that's just,
Thank you.
that's just wonderful.
Thank you so much. Really. Thank you.
Well, in bringing this to a close, let me answer the question, offer an answer to the question that Otto didn't answer, which was to describe the kind of art that I believe we have in this exhibition and in Susan Erony's career. And I'll put it to the trope of, this will include music and literature, I hope, is an artist's job or an artist's skill is to see what is unseen, to notice what goes unnoticed. And I think we have here in this body of work by Susan Erony a bearing witness, which I want to put in that context and not merely as activism or reaction, but as part of a larger idea of if a cook has better taste, literally, and they share that with the world, and an artist, we are bearing witness to the human condition and political history. I mean, to put gentle arms around to circumscribe it. I think we can include those artists who had visual revolutions in seeing what was unseen and bringing it out. And here we have an artist very engaged in our own history and sense of self. And I just thank you so much for this clear window into a very fascinating and deep process that your talk gave today. I have known you for years, and I say this about other artists as well. I am still learning about Susan Erony and her art, and just want to join me in thanking her again.
God, thank you. I can't say anything else. Thank you.